The order came before anybody had checked whether I was breathing. No identification, no insurance, no reason to believe I could pay. So the woman behind the emergency desk pointed toward the doors and said, "Get him out before he becomes our problem." Then a nurse in faded green scrubs grabbed the rail of my gurney, looked that woman straight in the eye, and said, "He became our problem the moment he collapsed outside our hospital." My name is Walter Bennett, though nobody at Briarwood Regional knew that on the morning I arrived. And at 77 years old, I had spent most of my adult life being recognized before I ever introduced myself. My name was printed on office towers, scholarship funds, shipping containers, and one embarrassingly large performing arts center in Baltimore that my daughter still claimed looked like a toaster. Depending on which financial magazine you believed, I was worth somewhere between $3 and $5 billion, which sounds impressive until you were standing alone in a hospital room where your older sister died, calling for water. Her name was Margaret, and she had raised me after our father disappeared and our mother started working double shifts at a textile mill. She was the kind of woman who sent handwritten birthday cards to people she had not seen in 20 years, the kind who carried peppermints in her purse and apologized to furniture after bumping into it. She had also spent the final 2 days of her life in a private hospital, pressing a call button that nobody answered because her supplemental insurance had expired 3 weeks earlier. My attorney, Miles Carver, found the nursing logs after I threatened enough lawsuits to make the hospital board stop smiling. 17 calls in 40 hours, 6 requests for water, 4 complaints of worsening chest pressure, 3 requests for help reaching the bathroom, and not one documented response. The hospital called it a staffing failure. I called it what it was, a decision. Somebody had looked at an old woman with no premium coverage and decided she could wait. Margaret died at 2:13 in the morning, alone, with her blanket on the floor and an empty paper cup beside her bed. I stood in that room 5 days later, breathing in the lemon disinfectant they had sprayed over everything, and felt something inside me go quiet. Not calm, exactly. More like the silence before a building collapses. Miles stood by the window holding the call log, watching me the way lawyers watch clients who are either about to cry or commit a felony. I told him I wanted to know whether that hospital was uniquely rotten or whether money had become the unofficial pulse hospitals checked first. He asked what I planned to do with that knowledge. I said I was going to walk into another emergency room looking like a man who owned nothing and see who treated me like I was worth saving. Miles stared at me for a long time, then reminded me I had an irregular heartbeat, a surgically repaired knee, and the stubbornness of a mule that had recently discovered caffeine. I told him Margaret had called 17 times. He stopped arguing after that. We chose Briarwood Regional in Ashford, Pennsylvania, a privately managed hospital with decent public ratings, aggressive billing practices, and a new chief operating officer who had spent the previous year bragging about efficiency targets. My investment company quietly held a 32% stake through 2 subsidiaries, but I had never visited the place and almost nobody there knew my face. For 11 days, I prepared to become invisible. I stopped shaving, slept badly on purpose, ate little, and wore an old work shirt Miles found at a church donation center. We rubbed dirt into the cuffs, cut one shoe along the side, and replaced the lace on the other with twine. I removed my watch, wallet, phone, hearing aids, and every small object that told the world I belonged somewhere. When I looked in the mirror on the final morning, I did not see a billionaire pretending to be poor. I saw the sort of man people avoid making eye contact with at traffic lights. That frightened me more than I admitted. At 6:48 on a freezing Thursday morning, Miles dropped me 3 blocks from Briarwood. He wanted a medical team nearby, but I refused because I needed the reactions to be real. I walked slowly toward the emergency entrance, feeling the wet pavement through the split sole of my shoe, then collapsed beside a concrete planter where a security guard could see me. I meant to control the fall, but my knee buckled too quickly and my cheek struck the ground hard enough to open the skin beneath my eye. The pain was immediate and bright. For a few seconds, I forgot the plan entirely. A maintenance worker named Luis ran over, took off his jacket, and put it under my head while calling for help. He kept saying, "Stay with me, sir. Stay with me." And I remember thinking that the first person to show me kindness at Briarwood was a man holding a mop. 2 orderlies brought a gurney, rolled me through the automatic doors, and parked me near the intake station. That was where I met Celeste Ward. Celeste wore a cream blouse beneath a tailored navy jacket, gold earrings, and the expression of someone who believed irritation was a form of intelligence. She looked at my torn shirt, my damaged shoes, and the empty spaces on the intake sheet. No address, no identification, no insurance provider, no emergency contact. She never touched me. She never asked my name. She told the orderly to call the municipal outreach van and move me to the vestibule. One of the paramedics said my blood pressure was low and my pulse was irregular. Celeste replied, "He is probably dehydrated, intoxicated, or both, and none of those conditions require a private bed." Then she lowered her voice, though not enough, and added, "We cannot keep turning this department into a hotel for street people." I kept my eyes half closed and listened as shoes passed around me. Rubber soles, leather heels, squeaking clogs, all moving with purpose, none stopping. A resident glanced at my chart and put it back. A nurse asked whether I'd been searched for needles. Somebody laughed when an orderly complained about the smell. I had spent 50 years entering rooms where people stood when they saw me, and now I lay 6 inches from the floor while they discussed me like a leaking garbage bag. I thought of Margaret reaching for that call button, wondering whether anyone had heard her. Then 2 fingers pressed gently against the inside of my wrist. The nurse attached to those fingers was named Denise Coleman. She was 42, maybe 45, with tired eyes, a loose curl falling across her forehead, and a coffee stain on the pocket of scrubs that had been washed so many times the fabric had gone soft at the knees. She checked my pulse, leaned closer, and asked if I could hear her. I opened my eyes just enough to see her face. She did not recoil. She did not glance toward the insurance field. She put one hand on my shoulder and said, "My name is Denise, and I am not letting them put you back outside." Celeste heard her. Everybody heard her. She walked over with a tablet pressed against her chest and said, "This patient has not been authorized for admission." Denise answered without looking up. "His pulse is 49 and irregular. His lips are blue, and his pressure is 86/52. Celeste told her the outreach clinic could assess him. Denise finally stood, and though she was nearly a foot shorter, the whole hallway seemed to tighten around her. "The outreach clinic is 30 minutes away," she said, "and he may not have 30 minutes. Celeste's mouth turned into a thin smile. "You've already been warned about wasting resources." Denise unlocked the gurney wheels, then warned me again in writing. She began pushing me down the hall. Celeste stepped in front of her and said, "If you put that man in a monitored room without authorization, the cost goes under your department code and the violation goes in your file." Denise paused, looked down at me, then back at Celeste. "Fine," she said. "Put my name on all of it." She pushed past her, wheeled me into a small room at the end of the corridor, pulled a warm blanket over my chest, and lowered her voice so only I could hear. "You are safe in here." I wanted to believe her, but through the open doorway I could see Celeste standing at the nurse's station, typing quickly with both thumbs, and even from 20 yards away I knew the look on her face. She was not documenting my condition. She was building a case against the one person who had chosen to save me. Denise moved fast once the door closed. Not frantic, not theatrical. Just the kind of fast that comes from knowing exactly how much time the body can lose before it stops forgiving you. She wrapped a pressure cuff around my arm, clipped a monitor to my finger, and frowned when the numbers appeared. My oxygen level was low. My pulse kept stumbling over itself, and the cold had turned my hands the color of old newspaper. She asked when I had last eaten. I told her I could not remember. That was a lie. I had eaten half a bowl of oatmeal at my house before dawn, but I needed her to believe the man in front of her had been sleeping wherever the wind stopped. She asked whether I drank alcohol, whether I used drugs, whether I had chest pain, whether I knew my own name. I gave her only the name Walter, because even in disguise I could not bring myself to surrender that much. She did not press for a last name. She inserted an IV, started warm saline, cleaned the cut beneath my eye, and placed adhesive pads across my chest for an electrocardiogram. The machine printed a narrow strip of paper that curled onto the tray like a confession. Denise studied it, then looked at me. "You have atrial fibrillation," she said. "Have you been diagnosed before?" I let my eyes drift away. Maybe. That answer bothered her, but she did not show impatience. She pulled a chair close to the bed and spoke slowly, making sure I understood. "Your heart is not beating in a steady rhythm. That can cause blood to collect and form a clot, and a clot can cause a stroke. I need a physician to examine you." I told her doctors cost money. She said, Staying alive costs less than dying. And besides, nobody is sending you a bill while I'm standing here. There was a dry humor in the way she said it, the sort people develop after too many years in places where tragedy shows up before breakfast. A young resident, named Dr. Evan Pike, entered 10 minutes later, glanced at me, then at the empty insurance field on the temporary chart. He told Denise he could not order a full cardiac panel until admissions created a case number. Denise handed him the ECG strip. He looked at it for 3 seconds and said, "This could be chronic." Denise said, "It could also be the beginning of a stroke we get to explain later." Evan lowered his voice and told her Celeste had already flagged the room. Denise leaned against the counter and asked him whether Celeste had attended medical school overnight. He looked embarrassed, which was at least better than looking indifferent. He finally ordered basic blood work under an emergency code and warned Denise that he would probably hear about it before lunch. She told him to take a number. After he left, Denise brought me a cup of water and held it while I drank because my hands were shaking more than I intended. The water tasted metallic and warm, but I drank every drop. She gave me crackers, applesauce, and a cup of soup from the staff kitchen. When I asked whether the soup belonged to the hospital, she said it belonged to whoever needed it most, and right now that was me. Around noon, Celeste appeared in the doorway with a printed form. She did not come all the way into the room. She stood just outside, as though poverty might be contagious if she crossed the threshold. She told Denise that transportation to the city shelter had been arranged for 2:30. Denise replied that my pressure was still unstable and my heart rhythm had not improved. Celeste said, "We cannot keep him here because you have become emotionally attached to a stranger." Denise checked my IV line and said, "I am professionally attached to a patient. There is a difference." Celeste tapped the paper against her palm. "He has no documented identity, no medication history, and no responsible party." Denise turned toward her. "That is why he needs more care, not less." Celeste laughed once, quietly. "You really do enjoy rescuing people who cannot repay you." Denise's face changed then, not much, just enough for me to see that the remark had found an old wound. She asked Celeste whether repayment was part of the nursing oath now. Celeste said this was not about morality. It was about sustainability. Beds cost money, medication costs money, staff time costs money, and compassion without limits was merely bad management with better public relations. Denise stepped closer to the doorway. "A demon in the parking lot is bad management too." Celeste's smile vanished. "The transport arrives at 2:30, she said. "Be ready." She walked away, her heels striking the floor with the steady rhythm my heart no longer had. Denise waited until she was gone, then closed the door. I asked whether she was always that pleasant. Denise looked at me and said, "Only on days ending in Y." It was the first time I laughed since Margaret died, and the sound surprised both of us. At 2:15, Denise checked my pressure again. It had risen slightly, but not enough to make discharge reasonable. The outreach van arrived anyway. A driver in a brown jacket came upstairs with a wheelchair and an unsigned transfer sheet. He looked at me, then at the monitor, and told Denise his vehicle was not medically equipped. Denise said, "Exactly." Celeste appeared behind him and ordered the monitor disconnected. Denise folded her arms. "I am not doing that." Celeste told the driver to wait in the hall, then entered the room for the first time. She lowered her voice and said Denise was creating a disciplinary record that could follow her for years. Unauthorized treatment, insubordination, misuse of resources, interference with patient transfer. Denise asked whether keeping an unstable man under observation now counted as interference. Celeste said, "You know what this is really about." Denise stared at her. "Go ahead, say it." Celeste glanced at me, apparently deciding I was too confused to understand. "This department is already over budget," she said. "The board expects a 12% reduction by the end of the quarter. Every uninsured admission hurts our numbers, and every one of your personal crusades makes my job harder." There it was, not hatred exactly, not even simple greed, but something more ordinary and therefore more dangerous. Celeste wanted control. She wanted the spreadsheet to stay green, the board to praise her, the promotion to arrive on schedule. People like me were not human beings in her calculations. We were red marks. Denise asked what would happen if the man in the bed were the father of someone on the board. Celeste said, "Then someone would have called." Denise looked at her for a long moment. "So a person only matters if somebody important knows his name." Celeste answered, "That is not what I said." Denise replied, No, it is just what you meant. Celeste told her the transfer would happen by 3. Denise said it would not happen while she was responsible for me. Celeste leaned close enough that I could smell expensive perfume beneath the antiseptic. Then you will not be responsible for him much longer. She turned and left, taking the unsigned form with her. The transport driver gave Denise a sympathetic shrug and rolled the empty wheelchair away. By 4, my blood work had returned. I was dehydrated, my potassium was low, and the cardiac markers were inconclusive but concerning enough that Dr. Pike wanted a repeat test. He came into the room without looking over his shoulder this time. He told me my condition was probably manageable, but I needed medication, fluids, and observation through the night. I asked whether that meant I was officially admitted. His silence answered before he did. He said the administrative hold was still in place, but medically, yes, I should stay. Denise wrote every word on a yellow notepad because the electronic chart still showed me as pending transfer. She recorded my vital signs. Every cup of water, every medication, every conversation, and every attempt to remove me. She was building a paper trail because she understood something I had learned in business long ago. Systems forget people. The paper remembers. Her shift ended at 6, yet she remained until nearly 8 because the night nurse assigned to my room had been moved to another floor. She called staffing twice and got no replacement. Finally, a nurse named Megan agreed to check on me between her other patients. Denise gave her detailed instructions, then returned to my bedside with a plastic bag containing a toothbrush, socks, a clean undershirt, and a small comb. I asked where they came from. She said the hospital donation closet. I later learned the closet had been empty and she had bought everything downstairs at the pharmacy. Before leaving, she wrote her phone number on the back of my meal receipt and placed it beside the call button. If nobody comes, call me, she said. I asked why she trusted me with her personal number. She shrugged and said, I do not. I trust that you might need help. That distinction stayed with me. After she left, I watched darkness settle against the window and listened to the hospital change shifts. Daytime emergency softened into nighttime neglect. The halls grew quieter, but the call bells kept ringing. At 9:40, I pressed mine. Nobody came. I waited 7 minutes and pressed again. A nursing assistant opened the door, saw me awake, and asked what I wanted. I said my chest felt tight. She told me the nurse would be notified. 20 minutes passed. I pressed again. This time nobody opened the door. Margaret had called 17 times, and as I lay there counting the minutes, I finally understood the cruelty of waiting for help in a place built to provide it. The fear was not loud. It crept in slowly, whispering that maybe you had been forgotten because you deserved to be. At 10:31, my chest genuinely tightened. The monitor alarmed twice, then stopped when the lead slipped loose. I reached for the receipt with Denise's number. My hand hovered over it. Calling would reveal too much too soon. When not calling had started to feel less like courage and more like stupidity. Before I decided, the door opened. Denise stood there in jeans, an old winter coat, and the same worn sneakers she had worn during her shift. She was holding a paper cup of coffee in one hand and a pharmacy bag in the other. I asked why she had come back. She said Megan texted her that no one had checked my rhythm in 2 hours. Then she looked at the loose monitor lead, the untouched water pitcher, and the darkened call button above my bed. Her mouth tightened. She reattached the lead, checked my pulse, and called Dr. Pike from her personal phone. When he answered, she told him my rhythm had worsened and demanded an order for medication. He hesitated, worried about the administrative flag. Denise said, Evan, if this man strokes tonight, you can explain to his family that we protected the budget. He reminded her I had no family listed. Denise looked directly at me and said, then you can explain it to me. He gave the order. The hospital pharmacy had already closed its inpatient window for unregistered cases, so Denise opened the bag she had brought. Inside was the exact medication I needed, purchased from a 24-hour pharmacy across town. I saw the receipt folded beneath the bottle. $179.86. Denise's name was printed at the bottom. I asked whether she had paid for it. She said, take the pill, Walter. I told her I could not repay her. She poured water into a cup. I did not ask you to. I held the tablet in my palm and felt something inside me crack. Because I had spent decades surrounded by people who knew my net worth before they knew my middle name, people who gave gifts while calculating what the return might be. Denise believed I was broke, inconvenient, probably difficult, and possibly lying to her. If she had spent money, she clearly did not have to keep my heart beating through the night. I swallowed the pill. She sat beside the bed until my rhythm began to settle, then pulled the thin blanket higher over my shoulders. Around midnight, believing I was asleep, she made a call in the hallway. I heard only pieces. Rent due Friday. No, I cannot ask Keisha again. I know the card is nearly maxed. I will figure it out. When she returned, I kept my eyes closed because shame had made it impossible to look at her. I had wanted to test whether compassion still existed, but I had not considered what it would cost the person who proved it did. The next morning, I decided I needed to know whether her kindness had limits, and that decision remains one of the few things in my life I am still not entirely proud of. I became demanding. I complained that the oatmeal was cold, then refused a replacement because it was too sweet. I spilled water across the bed and insisted the sheets were uncomfortable. I pressed the call button repeatedly, asked for another pillow, rejected it, then asked for the first one back. Denise arrived for her shift looking as though she had slept maybe 3 hours. She changed the sheets, cleaned the floor, adjusted the pillows, and never once raised her voice. Finally, I told her she had missed a wet spot near the rail. She stopped. For 1 second I saw exhaustion, anger, and disappointment pass through her face. I thought I had found the edge. Then she took a towel, dried the rail, and said, "You are allowed to be scared, Walter, but you are not allowed to make cruelty contagious." The words hit harder than any insult could have. I asked what made her think I was scared. She sat down, looked at my torn shirt and trembling hands, and said, "Because people who have been ignored too long sometimes create problems just to prove somebody will still come." I could not answer. She had seen through the performance without seeing the truth beneath it. She believed my behavior came from abandonment, and instead of punishing me, she named the wound. Before I could apologize, Celeste entered with 2 security officers and a discharge packet. She announced that the board had reviewed the case. The administrative hold had been resolved, and I was leaving immediately. Denise stood between the officers and my bed. She asked which physician had approved discharge. Celeste said the decision was administrative. Denise replied, "Hearts do not care about administrative decisions." Celeste handed her a document and told her to sign as the discharging nurse. Denise read it, then tore it cleanly in half. The room went silent. Celeste stared at the pieces on the floor. "You just ended your career," she said. Denise looked at me, then back at her. "Maybe," she said, "but I did not end his life." One of the security officers bent down to pick up the torn pages, but Celeste stopped him with a raised hand. Like even the paper had become evidence in a trial she had already decided she would win. She told Denise to remove her badge, surrender her keys, and report to Human Resources before leaving the building. Denise unclipped the badge from her faded scrubs and held it for a moment, staring at the photograph taken 11 years earlier, back where her hair was shorter and her eyes had not yet learned how heavy a hospital hallway could become. Then she placed it on the counter. Celeste smiled, but there was no joy in it, only relief. The brittle kind people feel when they believe they have crushed the last person willing to challenge them. She turned to the officers and ordered them to move me to the entrance. That was when I sat up, pulled the IV from my arm and said, "Nobody touches Nurse Coleman." My voice sounded different because I was no longer trying to make it weak. Celeste noticed. Denise noticed too. For the first time since I arrived, I swung both feet onto the floor and stood without hunching my shoulders. My knee hurt, my heart was tired, and my cheek still carried the bruise from the pavement. But I had spent 4 days learning what kind of people filled that building, and I was done pretending not to know my own name. I looked at Celeste and asked what time it was. She glanced at the wall clock, confused. 6:12. I nodded. Right on schedule. Headlights swept across the window behind me. A moment later, 3 black sedans rolled beneath the emergency awning, followed by a medical transport vehicle and a news van that Miles had invited only after confirming we had enough evidence to survive every denial Briarwood could manufacture. Celeste walked to the window, saw the cars, then looked back at me. The color slowly drained from her face. Miles Carver stepped out of the first sedan carrying a leather case. 2 attorneys followed him, along with Dr. Humphrey Sal, Miriam Ross, a retired federal healthcare investigator who had spent the previous 48 hours reviewing the recordings from my room. They entered the floor together, and the hallway changed. Conversations stopped. Doors opened. People who had ignored me for days suddenly became very interested in the man standing beside an empty hospital bed. Miles came through the doorway, looked at the torn shirt, the bruised face, and the tape around my shoe, then gave Celeste his business card. Walter Bennett, he said, is the founder and controlling chairman of Bennett Atlantic Group through its medical investment division. His company holds 32% of Briarwood Regional and guarantees a substantial portion of this hospital's expansion debt. One of the security officers took a step backward. The other quietly set the torn discharge papers on the counter. Celeste read the card twice. Then she looked at me with the stunned expression of someone who had just discovered the stray dog in her lobby owned the building. She tried to recover quickly. She said there'd been a misunderstanding, that my lack of identification had created an unusual administrative situation, that every decision had been made according to policy. I asked whether policy required her to call me street trash, deny me a physician, block my chart, threaten the nurse who bought my medication, and order an unstable cardiac patient into an unequipped transport van. Her mouth opened, but Miles placed a small recorder on the bedside table and pressed play. Celeste's own voice filled the room. Every uninsured admission hurts our numbers. Then another recording. He has nobody. Then the sentence that finally broke whatever confidence remained in her face. Then you will not be responsible for him much longer. Denise stood near the wall, watching me as if I had become a stranger. In some ways I had. I wanted to explain everything at once, but there was no explanation that could make 4 days of deception feel honest. I turned to her and said my full name. I told her about Margaret, the 17 unanswered calls, the empty cup and the blanket on the floor. I told her I had come to Briarwood because I needed to know whether anyone would care for a man who seemed unable to offer anything in return. Denise listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked the only question that mattered. Was your heart condition real? I said yes. Her eyes hardened. You could have died. I told her I knew that. She shook her head and said, no, Mr. Bennett, I do not think you did. That was not the grateful reaction I had imagined during those long nights, but it was the one I deserved. Celeste tried to step around Miles and leave, but Dr. Ross informed her that the hospital board was assembling downstairs and that all electronic records, internal messages, transfer orders, and staffing logs had been placed under legal preservation. By 7:30, the board had suspended Celeste pending investigation. By midnight, they had uncovered a pattern stretching back 18 months. Dozens of uninsured patients transferred before proper examination, complaints buried, nurses threatened, and performance bonuses tied to reducing what management privately called non-recoverable bodies. Celeste had not invented the cruelty, but she had perfected it. The chief administrator resigned 3 days later. Celeste was terminated the following week, and the state opened a licensing investigation that eventually barred her from holding a clinical management position for 5 years. I wish I could tell you that watching her carry a cardboard box through the lobby healed something in me. It did not. Revenge is loud for a few minutes. Then grief comes back and sits in the same chair. The only thing that helped was what came next. I placed $60 million into a new patient dignity trust named for Margaret Bennett, with independent oversight and one rule written into its charter, in language no accountant could soften. Care begins with need, never with net worth. Briarwood eliminated financial screening from emergency intake, created a legal advocacy office for vulnerable patients, and required every transfer to receive physician approval. Denise was offered the position of executive director with a salary large enough to make her laugh because she thought Miles had added an extra zero. She did not accept immediately. She told me she was a nurse, not a symbol, and she would not let a rich man turn her worst week into a publicity campaign. We argued for nearly an hour. I told her I did not need a symbol. I needed the only person in the building who had understood the job before anybody changed the rules. She finally agreed on 3 conditions. The trust would be audited publicly, frontline nurses would hold voting seats, and no building, hallway, or conference room would carry my name. I agreed to all 3. Then she added a 4th. I had to stop conducting dangerous secret tests on people who had not consented to participate. I told her that sounded less like a condition and more like a lecture. She said, good, then maybe you will remember it. 6 months later, I returned to the room where she had saved me. The walls had been repainted, the broken curtain replaced, and a small cabinet held clean socks, toiletries, bus vouchers, and prepaid medication cards for patients who arrived with nothing. Above the call button hung a plain wooden plaque. It did not mention my company, my money, or the scandal. It simply read, "Every person who enters this room belongs to someone, even if that someone has not arrived yet." Denise stood beside me in new scrubs and the same old sneakers, though the torn sole had finally been replaced. I asked why she had not bought better shoes with her new salary. She said these were comfortable and told me billionaires worried about strange things. Then she checked my pulse, frowned, and asked whether I had taken my medication. I said I had. She knew I was lying before I finished the sentence. Some things changed at Briarwood, and some things did not. People still made mistakes. Budgets still mattered. Nurses still worked too many hours, and administrators still found elegant words for ugly decisions. But now, when someone arrived without insurance, without identification, or without a person waiting beside them, they were brought inside first and questioned later. Maybe that should never have required a billionaire in torn clothes. Maybe the fact that it did is the part we should be angriest about. I still think about the test, and I still wonder whether I had the right to put Denise through it. She saved my life, but I endangered hers in a different way, risking her career to satisfy a question born from my own grief. So tell me honestly, was I right to expose the hospital the way I did? Or did my money make me believe I had the right to test ordinary people without their consent? And if you had been standing in that hallway, with your job on one side and a stranger's life on the other, which one would you have chosen? Leave your answer in the comments. Share this story with someone who still believes dignity should never depend on a wallet. And remember, character is not how you treat the powerful when they are watching. It is how you treat the forgotten when you believe nobody ever will.